Yeah, so it's like, it's become very,
You okay? Okay, well, thanks for talking to us. If
okay.
it's okay, just an overview. We kind of started this wondering how much AI may or may not be changing
Hmm.
the landscape of students at universities as we head to finals. So that's kind of how we started this thing.
Okay,
But
okay.
if it's okay, I'll ask you a little bit. First, give me your name, first and last, and the title, please.
Okay, I am Subbarao Kambhampati, and I am a professor in the School of Computing and AI.
Spell that, professor, for me so I get it right. First and last name.
Subbarao, Subbarao,
Okay,
Subbarao Kambhampati, Kambhampati.
got it.
Yeah.
So what happens in your department here? What kind of things do you do?
This is a Department of Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence, Augmented Intelligence, and so basically we are interested in looking at technologies that help humans in what are considered intelligent tasks, in addition to general computer science topics such as hardware, software, software engineering, and so on. So that's the sorts of things that we have that happen, and there's a bunch of work and research going on, and all sorts of AI, artificial intelligence topics in the department, in the school.
How
Just
does
real quick,
yeah?
just be careful with your hands, you're bouncing the table.
Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
How does this school and what you do here end up translating to the outside world? Do you team up with companies or government agencies?
Yes, so most of the research is sponsored by either federal agencies. In my own case, multiple federal agencies, DoD, Department of Defense, NSF, and also lots of us get gifts or the grants from more like contracts from local industry or national industry partners, and so that's one main way. Of course, as an educational institution, our biggest way we actually help the industry and the world in general is our students. So our students go on internships. So in fact, it's you can't go to Silicon Valley and throw a stone without hitting any Sunnyvale, essentially. Right. I mean, so computer science, ASU computer science students are all over Silicon Valley. So those are like the main impacts that we have.
Tell me about how fast and how far we've come with something like AI. Because to us out in the outside world, it seems like overnight, boom, it was there. What is it from your point of view?
So yeah, I think as a field, AI has been around since 1956. Actually, I think that's, there was like this meeting when they coined the name. And I personally have been working since my undergrad days, so close to 40 years. The main thing that changed is in the beginning, we were getting computers to do what are intelligent tasks that we do, but we know how we do them. Things like playing chess. We not only play chess, we have the rules of chess, and we know how to play chess. We can tell people how to play chess. But there are many other things we do, such as walking, such as swimming, such as singing, such as painting, that we do that's extremely hard to explain in words. Those sorts of things we basically could not get machines to do. In the last 10, 15 years, basically, with the advent of web, internet, and cell phone technology, etc., there's like tons and tons of data about all these activities that's on the web. And so you can actually train systems using that data. In a way, that's not that different from what happens to our kids. The kids basically, in the beginning, learn to walk, learn to swim or whatever, basically by trial and error and by looking at the world. And it's only the things like math that we teach them later. So the funnier thing is that kids went that way from tacit, what's called tacit knowledge, to explicit knowledge. AI systems did explicit knowledge tasks before, like back in late 90s, we already defeated Kasparov in chess. But now we can actually recognize movies, recognize pictures, develop, generate pictures, corresponding to any prompt, and most recently generate text corresponding to any prompt. And that essentially is all of writing. So pretty much all of conversation, all of writing is, I ask you to tell me something about the following topic, and you start talking. And then I interrupt and say something else, and then you continue. And so it becomes easier to generate these sorts of things now.
How has this, sir, changed the landscape of what students are doing to write their papers and take tests and do finals.
I think so. Technology has been evolving quite a bit over the last many years, and so when Google came along, already students can do a lot more research, a lot easier without having to actually step out and go to the library. They can essentially sit in front of the computer and look at Wikipedia, look at this and all these things. That was the positive side. The negative side is that if they didn't really want to do their own thinking, they can copy from Wikipedia, copy from various books and submit those things. And this became kind of a cat and mouse game. And so technologies are developed on the educational side, which can spot directly copied passages. Right, like there are companies like Turnitin and various other things, which will compare people's essays, students' essays, or even students' code to known code repositories and known text repositories.
So they can get caught.
They can get caught. What changed now? So that is already going on right now. And what changed now with the advent of these sorts of ChatGPT style technologies is they don't directly index and retrieve entire passages. It's sort of like your and my memory. If we read about something and we're telling it to our friend, we give the gist of it in our own words, mostly because we don't actually remember the exact passage that we read. We are just essentially able to complete the gist. These systems almost work that way. Essentially, they are stringing together words that would be a logical completion of the prompt or the question that you gave them. What that essentially means is that the essay they put together, for example, will never be anywhere on the Wikipedia. You can't prove that the students have actually copied it verbatim from anywhere else. And so that obviously is a new kink in this cat and mouse game. Again, everything has a huge positive side. For example, students can use these sorts of systems to improve their writing. They can put together their rough thoughts in maybe English that's somewhat rough, especially when you have lots and lots of students for whom English is not, not necessarily a first language. And then they can have their ChatGPT style LLMs, large language models, to rewrite the text. In fact, I can tell you that I get tons of mails from international students asking for internships, asking for research assistant positions, etc. And ever since ChatGPT, the quality of English has become more like Midwest now. So it's no longer doesn't sound like there is no such thing as Indian English or Chinese English. It's all whatever ChatGPT writes sort of a thing. That could be seen as a positive thing because they're getting their message across, but in terms that I can understand. But the other side of it is they can also use it for things like plagiarism.
Are professors around here, you didn't tire? No. Are professors worried about that around here?
Yeah, in general, academia has been quite worried since like December, because I think November 30th is when OpenAI put ChatGPT out into complete open usage. And the university started hyperventilating as to how, especially certain kinds of things like essay-based evaluation, in English and so on, it becomes a much harder thing. And so the universities are actually having, including at ASU, they're having think tanks and discussion groups to figure out what is the best way to handle this. Some have taken extreme steps in some universities, like we don't allow access to ChatGPT. But others are taking actually a more interesting proactive steps. For example, one of the things that's well known is, as I said, ChatGPT and our LLMs, the large language models. And I keep saying ChatGPT, but there are many other things like Bard in Google and so on. All of these are essentially dynamically generating the answer. And the answer is not really factual or intentionally a lie. It is just a most likely completion of what the question was. So if you said this question, it's almost like if I say he stepped onto the road and looked left and then you will complete in your mind right, because that's the most likely completion. Except they're doing this with much bigger context. Given the last 3,000 words, what would be the most likely words that we need to string together? When they do that, they can actually make up stuff. It's been called hallucination, but essentially everything, we do this. Human memory is very fallible, which is why in courts, when witnesses are not trusted like right away, because our memory works almost this way. We string together pieces to make into stories. Sometimes the stories are not actually completely true, and these systems have the same exact problem. And so some professors have actually used this to say, okay, you can ask ChatGPT for the answer to this factual question, but then you need to correct it. Do you see what I'm saying? Because it's like it sounds very authentic, because that's part of our problem. We tend to think that people who speak smoothly also know truth, right? That part is like a cognitive flaw that we humans have, that we think that people who are well dressed, people who speak smoothly must know what they're doing. That's why most of the con jobs are by smooth talkers, not by people with right. But that has to change now, because everybody can speak smoothly with ChatGPT in the background. And so from the professor side, we need to actually look at the content, which is longer. It takes more time. And from the student side, you can ask them, if you use ChatGPT, if it's a factual question, it's a question which actually has answers that are true versus false, you need to go through what it said and figure out what is right and what is wrong. To give you an example, if I go and ask GPT-4, which is like the latest and greatest system, give me a 500-word bio of Subbarao Kambhampati. That's myself, right? Because that's the most narcissistic thing to do. And it will give a 500-word bio. It would look more or less kind of correct. And it turns out that it makes up a whole bunch of things. But I would know that. Right. Do you see what I'm saying? So, for example, when the last I asked it, it said, I'm a president of a particular professional organization. I was a president of AAAI, which is artificial intelligence organization, but it said I was a president of a computational linguistics organization. For somebody outside, they can't tell. It looks, maybe it's right. Do you understand what I'm saying? But I knew. So the point is, so if suppose somebody were to make a biography for some question, I can make them double check with Google. So still, by the way, it turns out that Google, when it points you to credible sources like Wikipedia, is still a lot more factual than ChatGPT and these LLMs can be. And currently, that's just the reality. They're basically like worse than our memories. And our memories are fallible. We can remember a few things, but if you want me, if I ask you exactly what happened yesterday in your life, you would basically unintentionally, non-deliberately make up a whole bunch of stuff. It's not necessarily that you're trying to lie. It's just because you haven't indexed it. It's not a video in your head. You're putting pieces together. The order will be mixed up. You may have done one activity before other activity, but you'll remember the other way around. That's exactly what these systems wind up doing. And so you can use that, basically with the students and say, if you're using it, double check that there are errors. There are other ways in which you can actually catch plagiarism in terms of, so one idea would be, if you use a large language model to produce some text, can there be a watermark on it so that I can tell that this part was produced by these kinds of systems? There's significant research that's going on there right now. And one particularly interesting idea is essentially, because these systems have this ability that, suppose if I were to ask you to tell me your life story without using the following 15 words, it's hard for us. In fact, I think there are like TV games of this kind saying, say whatever you want to say, but without using the following 15 words. You can make ChatGPT to write an essay without using the following 20,000 words. So English approximately has 50,000 word functional vocabulary. So I can say, don't use these blacklist words. Right? And then the thing that comes out, it's paraphrased, and so you can't tell the difference. It will be still English, okay? But then, if you know what the blacklist words are, then you know whether, in fact, it was generated by the large language model or normal people. Because normal people don't know what the blacklist is, so they would actually start using those words. This is actually a pretty good way of checking, watermarking the text. Except, for this to work, the people selling these systems need to want to help, and it's not very clear that they want to, because if they're selling this service, they probably would want people to be able to say we wrote this.
Because the bigger moneymaker is the large group of students around the
Not
world.
just students, I mean, we are talking, because we are in the university, we are talking about the students, but really this stuff was not made for students. I mean, students are the smartest ones. They are always ahead of the curve when they try to use the technology for themselves. But this is for anybody. This is for writers. This is for lawyers. You know, I mean, every day you read that lawyers, instead of writing like an entire case summary, they tend to write some, bulleted point stuff, and then ChatGPT or these large language models convert it into English. In fact, there's a joke now that people take 5 bullet points that they want to send an email to their friends and give it to ChatGPT. It will make it into a 2-page letter, very nicely written letter, and then those friends will ask ChatGPT to convert it into 5 bullet points. Right? So between us, we are just increasing the the traffic on the internet. Yeah. But in a weird sense, we have this problem, as humans. We want things to be well written, but we also want gist of it in bullet points. Sure. If you anyway wanted bullet points, why can't I just send you bullet points? You will be offended if somebody writes you a letter with just bullet points. Right. But you need to have it this way. So, a law is full of this. And so basically they can have this sort of uses of, these kinds of technologies. And even there, and that could be a reasonable use. Right? In the case of students, of course, you might be more interested in plagiarism detection. Right. But, and so this blacklist, whitelist sorts of approaches are a way of capturing that.
A couple more things and I'm done. You all right?
Yeah.
Your arm?
Yeah.
No,
we're good.
How much do you think students are just using this technology in general, or is it still new enough?
I think typically the students, and I'm in the College of Engineering, our students are, of course, the smartest in being the early adopters of all tech. In general, I'm sure, we all know that our kids are faster with technology than the older people, right? And so people are already using this, and they're using it for all sorts of uses. One of the most interesting things is these systems were generated as text completing systems. That's all. So it was there for a long time, for 5 years back onwards. As you're typing on your iPhone, sometimes it basically suggests the word because it assumes that this is the word you're likely to type. Instead of suggesting the word and the spelling, now they can suggest sequence of words. That's essentially the way the technology will develop. But people found that it can actually be used, given that all of conversation, all of language activity is saying something. I say something and you say something that is connected to that, and I say something that is connected to what you said. And so you can use LLMs. You can use this to do that. And so students have essentially, actually, one of the early ones who have figured out that you can use these sorts of systems to kind of paraphrase things, to ask, instead of going to Google and ask, tell me all the research papers in this area and give me a summary of what happened in this area. Previously, they had to go, old days, they had to go to the library. More recently, they had to click on Google. Now they just ask ChatGPT, and it will give a summary. But when it gives a summary, oftentimes, it's not necessary that it's actually true. The summary is the most likely sequence of words. Sometimes it's actually correct, sometimes it's not. There have been cases where ChatGPT would generate citations, that is actual paper names with the names of journals they were published in, all made up. These journals don't exist, these papers don't exist. So I actually did the same thing. I did one more narcissism question where I asked ChatGPT for, in an area I work in, human AI systems, what are some of the best papers? Hoping that it'll say, one of my papers. Right. It did say one of my papers, except I never wrote that paper. Right? So I quickly actually have to write one and put it on archive so that people will cite it. So the point again is students are finding very interesting ways. There have actually been cases where recently in the news, for example, people have found, based on what ChatGPT said, people got into trouble. Like it made up an entirely convincing story that some mayor was a criminal, and that poor guy wasn't. Or that a law professor actually harassed his students, sexually harassed his students, and there was no such thing. If you ask a leading question, it gives a nice answer to it. And it's completely, there's this old movie called Absence of Malice, and that's playing out in big screen right now because ChatGPT doesn't mean to hurt you, mean to help you. It is just trying to complete the sentence. And all the meaning and all the truth, etc., is in your head when you actually look at it. And so students are finding the, both the uses and also kind of finding the pitfalls of it. And I believe that it's an interesting new world right now.
Yeah, cat and mouse game.
Cat and mouse games will move on exactly to a next level.
What do you think is next coming down the pike for all of this type of thing?
I think this type of technology, my sense is we'll get used to it. In fact, one of the most interesting, hopeful things that I've heard is this philosophy professor. I mean, after all, philosophy, you would think philosophy essays should be easy to make, right? And this philosophy professor basically had like two things to say back in December when the ChatGPT came. He said by January, he was like crying bucket saying, suddenly all my students' essays look so much more coherent, and I know that they clearly are not writing this stuff. Okay. By March, he was saying that I can spot a ChatGPT essay from a mile away. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because we get used to it. I mean, it's like we can still tell the difference between people who are faking it and people who are actually, who know what they're talking about. Maybe you can be taken a couple of days, a couple of times, but if you are actually interacting with the person who is faking it mostly without knowing what they're doing,